All right, let's dive into something I know a lot of you have been curious about. Astronaut UFO sightings. We've got articles, transcripts, even some historical accounts to look at. It's fascinating stuff, really. Accounts from people who have been to space and come back with stories they just can't explain.
It is pretty wild when you think about it, right? I mean, these are trained observers used to the demands of space travel. People who should be able to identify pretty much anything they see in the sky.
Right. And yet, they come back with these unexplained sightings. It makes you think, if even these highly skilled people are seeing things they can't explain, what does that tell us? Like, how much do we really know about what's out there?
Yeah, it's a good point. And before we even get to the really strange stuff, I think it's worth remembering that identifying objects, especially in space, can be really tricky. Even here on Earth, with all our technology, we have plenty of examples of trained pilots misidentifying what they're seeing.
Really? So even experienced pilots get things wrong sometimes. What kind of examples are we talking about?
Oh, tons of them. Like back in World War II, there were pilots who mistook the planet Venus for enemy aircraft. Imagine the stress they must have been under, only to realize they were freaking out over a planet.
Wow, that's kind of embarrassing. But I guess it makes sense if they were in a high-pressure situation.
And it wasn't just planets. Pilots also misidentified aircraft types sometimes. They'd see what they thought were German markings on a Spitfire, or they'd report seeing entirely non-existent German planes like the Heinkel He-113, which, by the way, never actually existed.
So you're saying misidentification is more common than we might think. But you mentioned earlier that these misidentifications could have some serious consequences.
Oh, absolutely. It can be a matter of life and death sometimes. Like that awful incident with Korean Airlines Flight 007 back in '83. A Soviet pilot thought the Boeing 747 was a military aircraft and shot it down. A terrible tragedy. And then there was that Airbus A300 the USS Vincennes shot down in '88. Another case of misidentification.
Those are truly heartbreaking examples. I guess it really highlights how important it is to really pay attention to what you're seeing, to be careful, and to consider every possible explanation.
Yeah, you got it. And this whole idea of misidentification isn't just something from wartime either. Remember the Belgian UFO wave in '89? All these people on the ground saw these triangular things with lights. And radar picked up anomalies, but the F-16 pilots who were sent up couldn't see anything out of the ordinary.
So what was going on there? Was it ever explained?
It's still up for debate, really. Could have been weird atmospheric conditions, or maybe radar glitches, or even just people misinterpreting star formations. There was also that case in 2004 where the Mexican Air Force got all this infrared footage of what they thought were really fast, hot objects. Turned out to be oil rig flares.
Oil rig flares? No way.
Oh.
It just goes to show that even with all the fancy technology we have, things can still be really deceiving.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
So we have to remember all this when we're looking at these astronaut UFO sightings, We need a healthy dose of skepticism and curiosity, especially since we're talking about people who've actually experienced space firsthand.
Yeah, it's not just some random person on the street saying they saw something weird. These are astronauts. And speaking of astronauts, one of the most outspoken believers in UFOs has got to be Gordon Cooper.
Oh, absolutely. Gordon Cooper, a real legend, one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts. I mean, this guy was the first American to sleep in space, the first to be televised from space, first to fly 2 orbital missions. He even set an endurance record on Gemini 5, which was a big deal for proving that a lunar mission was even possible.
Talk about an impressive resume. But it's not just his space flights that make him interesting. What really gets me is his strong belief in UFOs. And he wasn't just casually interested, he genuinely believed the US government was hiding information about them.
Yeah, he didn't shy away from saying it either. And he often brought up a statement President Truman made back in 1950 as proof. Truman said, and I quote, "I can assure you that flying saucers, given that they exist, are not constructed by any power on Earth." Pretty powerful words coming from a president.
Hard to ignore something like that,
Yeah.
especially when it's coming from the top. But Cooper didn't just stop at Truman's quote. He also talked about hundreds of reports from other pilots, especially military pilots, who had seen these unexplained things themselves.
And he didn't just focus on what others had seen. Cooper claimed to have seen UFOs multiple times himself throughout his career. He wrote about it in his memoirs, talked about it in the documentary Out of the Blue, even said he saw a film crew recording a saucer-shaped object landing at Edwards Air Force Base in 1957. Claimed the footage just vanished.
Vanished footage. That sounds like something out of a movie. But what always struck me about Cooper was that he wasn't coming from a place of fear. He was just genuinely curious.
Totally agree. He didn't seem scared or paranoid or anything. He was just a guy who had seen things that challenged what we thought we knew about the universe and wasn't afraid to talk about it. And you can't deny his background as an astronaut gave his words a certain weight.
It's almost like, he went from exploring what we know about space to questioning what we even know is possible.
And that's what makes his story so interesting, right? What did he actually see? Was there any truth to his claims about cover-ups? These questions are still fascinating to people today.
So we've got this problem of misidentification, right? How hard it is to know what you're seeing sometimes, even for trained pilots. And then we've got this highly respected astronaut saying, hey, there's something else out there. It's kind of mind-blowing.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, if astronauts with all their training and experience are seeing things they can't explain, what does that say about the limits of our knowledge?
And to add to that, let's jump ahead to a more recent account. Leroy Chiao, a former NASA astronaut who spent a lot of time in space. This wasn't during a mission, though. This happened while he was piloting his own plane off the coast of California.
Right, Chiao. He was flying at about 15,000 feet and saw these two metallic orbs moving super fast, just zip right by his plane.
Metallic orbs?
Yeah.
That's straight out of a sci-fi movie.
And here's the crazy part. Neither radar nor air traffic control picked up on these things.
They were invisible to everyone but Chiao. That just adds to the mystery.
Exactly. Chiao himself was completely puzzled. He wondered if maybe it was some top-secret military program, or, as he put it, something else entirely.
So we had this experienced astronaut, someone who spent years observing and analyzing things in space, and he sees something he absolutely cannot explain. Pretty compelling story, don't you think? Especially when you consider how it echoes Cooper's accounts. Maybe there's a pattern here.
It does make you wonder, doesn't it? Both Cooper and Chiao, trained observers, used to spotting aircraft and other things in the sky, both report seeing these strange, fast-moving objects that don't fit with any conventional explanations. It really is strange, it challenges what we think we know about what's up there. Makes you wonder, are there things happening right above us all the time that we're just clueless about? Things we can't even detect.
I know what you mean. It's like we think of space as this big unknown, but maybe we haven't even scratched the surface of what's happening in our own atmosphere.
It's true. And that reminds me of another interesting case, this one from the Gemini 4 mission back in '65. James McDivitt, while orbiting over Hawaii, saw this thing he described as cylindrical, almost like a beer can, he said, with this long arm sticking out.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. Didn't he take photos? They were kind of blurry, if I recall.
Yeah, they weren't the clearest, that's for sure. But blurry or not, those photos caused quite a stir. Some people thought it was an alien spacecraft, obviously, but others had more down-to-earth explanations.
So what was it then? Space junk? Some secret government project? Or something completely different?
Well, McDivitt himself, and he was a pretty level-headed guy, thought it was probably just space debris, maybe some ice or insulation that came off the spacecraft. And then there's James Oberg, you know him, he's the space journalist, a real skeptic, spent a lot of his time debunking UFO claims. He had another idea.
Oh, I'm curious, what did Oberg think it was?
He figured it could have been the Titan II second stage. Basically, a huge chunk of the rocket that helps get the capsule into orbit. Apparently, it would have been in a similar orbit to the Gemini capsule.
Ah, okay, so you're thinking maybe this big piece of equipment caught the light in a weird way. That does make a lot of sense. It's a good reminder that not every weird thing we see in space is automatically an alien spaceship, right?
Right. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier about how easy it is to misinterpret what you're seeing. Even astronauts who are used to being in space can be fooled by things like perspective and lighting. Sometimes they just don't have enough information to be sure what they're looking at.
Yeah, that's true. But you'd think astronauts would be able to recognize a part of their own rocket, wouldn't you?
You would think so. But space is weird, man. Things move in ways we're not used to down here. It's hard to judge size and distance because there aren't any familiar reference points.
That's a good point. It really highlights how important it is to look at these things from different angles.
Yeah.
We need to consider what the astronauts saw, what the evidence shows, and if there could be any normal explanations before we jump to conclusions.
Absolutely. And that's why guys like James Oberg are important. They bring that healthy skepticism, that critical thinking, to help us sift through the hype and figure out what's really going on.
Okay, so we've got Cooper with his multiple sightings, Chiao and those orbs, McDivitt and the beer can. As we're going through these astronaut UFO stories, are there any common things that pop up? Any recurring themes or patterns?
One thing I've noticed is that a lot of times these objects are described as moving in ways that just don't make sense for regular aircraft or satellites, like sudden changes in direction, super fast acceleration, even appearing and disappearing in an instant. Your average plane can't do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like how Chiao said, those orbs just zoomed past him.
Exactly. And another thing is that often radar doesn't pick up on these things at all. Even when you've got ground stations actively looking for them, it's like they're somehow invisible to radar.
Which is strange, because you'd think something like that would show up. And while it's always possible that these are just cases of mistaken identity, we can't forget that many astronauts are experienced test pilots. I mean, they've spent their careers pushing the limits of flight. They know how things should move, both in the air and in space. So they say they've seen something out of the ordinary. It makes you pay attention.
Oh yeah, definitely. These are people who are trained to observe and analyze, so their accounts, they deserve to be taken seriously.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Is there something going on up there, something that's beyond our current understanding of science and technology? Something that's only just starting to be revealed through these encounters astronauts are having?
A lot of people are asking those same questions. And of course, there's the whole question of government cover-up, something that Gordon Cooper was really passionate about.
The cover-up thing has always been a big part of the UFO discussion. That idea that governments and agencies are hiding the truth about extraterrestrial contact.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's a really exciting thought, right? And it's inspired so many books, movies, and conspiracy theories. But it's also a topic where it's easy to get carried away with speculation. We got to be careful and stick to the evidence we have.
You're right. We need to think critically about this stuff. Weigh the evidence, consider different viewpoints, and be open to the possibility that there might be more to the story than we realize. And, for people who are really into this, there's actually a ton of information out there. A lot of government documents and witness testimonies have been declassified over the years.
That's one of the cool things about this topic. It's not just a bunch of stories, there's a whole history to explore. Governments all over the world have been looking into UFOs for decades, and a lot of that information is now available to the public.
Yeah, and it's not just astronauts either. There are so many reports from pilots, military people, and everyday folks who've seen something strange in the sky.
It's a worldwide thing. People from all over, from all walks of life, reporting these things they can't explain. And while not every report is going to be a genuine UFO, the sheer number of them and how often they happen, it makes you think there's more to it than just misidentified planes and weather balloons.
It's almost like we're all picking up on something, sensing that there's a bigger picture out there, a reality that's beyond what we currently understand.
I know that feeling. It's exciting to think about the possibilities, but it's also important to stay grounded, to keep that balance of wonder and skepticism. Be open to the unknown, but don't get ahead of ourselves.
Well said. The search for truth, whether it's about UFOs or anything else, it's a journey, not a destination.
And who knows what we might find along the way. The universe is huge and full of mysteries. If we keep exploring with open minds and curious hearts, there's no telling what we might discover.
Exactly. And speaking of exploring further, there's one more aspect of this topic that I find really fascinating. We'll get into that when we come back for the final part of our deep dive. All right, so we're back, and we've been talking about astronaut UFO sightings. We've looked at some historical cases, some more recent encounters, the difficulty of knowing what you're really seeing, and the possibility that there are things out there we just don't understand yet. But now I want to take a step back and think about the bigger implications, like what do these sightings mean for us? What do they say about our place in the universe?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's something humans have been pondering for centuries. Are we alone? Or is there someone else out there? And if so, what does that mean for humanity?
I know. And these accounts from astronauts, these people who've seen Earth from space, it adds another layer to that whole question. Like, what if there are other intelligent beings out there and they've been watching us this whole time?
It's a pretty wild thought. And if they are advanced enough to travel between stars, their technology could be so far beyond anything we can imagine, it would look like magic to us.
Which might explain why those objects are described as moving in such bizarre ways. Like maybe we're seeing physics that we haven't even discovered yet.
Could be. And if we entertain the possibility that they're observing us, it makes you wonder about their motives. Are they just curious? Or do they have something else in mind?
Now we're getting into sci-fi territory. But hey, who knows, right? It's exciting to think about, but also a little intimidating. Maybe we're not the only ones on this cosmic stage.
It's definitely humbling. And it reminds us to approach this whole thing with a mix of excitement and skepticism. We should be open to the unknown, but we also need to think critically and stick to the evidence.
It's a balancing act, for sure. We need that curiosity, that desire to explore and question. But we also can't just jump to conclusions.
Right. The truth is out there, somewhere. It's up to us to find it through careful observation, analysis, and open minds.
So well said. I think that's a great place to leave it. We've covered a lot of ground today, and it's clear that the topic of astronaut UFO sightings raises more questions than answers. But maybe that's the point. It's a reminder that there's still so much we don't know about the universe and our place in it. And that's a pretty exciting thought.
It is, and who knows what discoveries await us in the future. If even those who ventured into space come back with stories of the unexplained, it suggests that the universe is far more vast, complex, and amazing than we can possibly imagine.
Absolutely. So keep looking up, keep asking questions, and never stop exploring the mysteries of the cosmos. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.